As this is the first SCIMAP user meeting, we thought we'd just take a quick departure from some of the more technical presentations and just have a look at how SCIMAP and Rivers Trust movement has kind of grown alongside each other for the last few years, because the Rivers Trust were very much involved in the development phase of SCIMAP and are continuing to take it forward and apply it in the field now. So we thought it would be useful just to give a bit of background on that. Just quickly, for those of you that are new to us, the Rivers Trust movement has been around since about, in England, since about 1996. We have got some Rivers Trusts up to 25 years old, but most of them has been really developed over the last few years. They're all incorporated charitable vehicles, so that means it allows people to raise money from charitable sources, provides them the necessary governance so they can manage those funds. We employ people, can enter into contracts, but keep trustees or directors free from personal liability. But the main reason we're there is to do delivery on the ground. That's our niche that we try to occupy, is about getting more done. And at the moment, we think we're probably the fastest growing environmental movement in the UK. We're just looking at the structure of Rivers Trust against the agency's 100 Water Framework Directive catchments. We're nearly up to covering about 70 out of those 100. And just a look at a map of coverage. We're still a very small movement, and all of our, many of our trusts are just completely voluntary based. But we're employing over 100 technical specialists now. We have over 10,000 active volunteers and 16,000 people who sort of give money on a regular basis to their local Rivers Trust. And we are active now in every Water Framework Directive river basin. Not every catchment, but every river basin district. The principles of the movement itself were set up on adhering to the 12 principles of the ecosystems approach, principles of managing catchments on a watershed basis, taking into account the land as well as the water and so on, subsidiarity, which is a sort of real EU phrase about taking decisions at the lowest level, and principles of partnership. So, diffuse pollution has featured as part of our work right from the very earliest days, and it started for me in 1996 with a West Country Rivers Trust project called Tamar 2000 and the Riverwise Plan, which was really turning the engagement with farmers on its head at the time. And bearing in mind that this was long before Catchment Sensitive Farming, and it was long before publication of the final guise of Water Framework Directive, the trust employees were walking the river watercourses, identifying evidence of pollution where it met the receptor, following those pathways up to the farmyard and identifying the actual source, additional factors for those sources like clean water coming in and so on, and dealing with them with the farmer. This is a very popular visual within the Rivers Trust movement. I think every Rivers Trust has got their own version of this, but this is West Country's, where we've showing typical sort of diffuse sources that we'd find in the landscape, and identifying the pathways as to how those get to the main river. And we worked with farmers to come up with ways to mitigate for that, things like buffer strips, stock exclusion, cover crops, contour ploughing, dirty water separation, rainwater collection, moving gateways, soil testing. You've heard of all this all before, and this actually led to the development of a set of guidance notes that eventually evolved into the Catchment Sensitive Farming programme itself. The example on the left there is a balancing pond on a pathway that Eden Rivers Trust has created, which actually intercepts sediment and also has an effect to stop flooding in the local village. That was done as part of a SCIMAP-driven project. So what did we learn over that process? Well, we learned that many of the improvements that we were making with farmers made economic sense as well as environmental sense. Many of the problems were really only identifiable from the riverbank itself. It's very hard to actually identify which of those things that are leaking from a farmyard are actually making it into the watercourse. That was very important. One-to-one visits with farmers gave results, but we also realised that there are an awful lot of farms, and our early projects really tried to tackle every single issue on every single farm and in a catchment. So, we've had this technical challenge of how do we upscale our work on a reach basis and with a farm basis up to a catchment scale. We can identify sources and pathways, and we know, we can often see the result in the actual river itself. Is that impact on the river, is it cumulative enough to actually be causing a problem for the catchment? How does that relate to the ecology of the catchment and so on? And these are all things that eventually led to us working with Durham. So this evolved into a project with Eden Rivers Trust called the RARE project, which was Rapid Assessment of River Environment. And this really came from a realisation of trying to port the original sort of farm advice stuff and realising that the trust had done £500,000 worth of work in 5 years and really probably made very little impact on the catchment scale itself. On a reach-by-reach basis, loads of improvements, but actually making an impact on the catchment scale was difficult. So we incorporated aerial photography, digital topographic data, integrated it into GIS with Durham's help and the SCIMAP model into a spatially structured database with all those evidence that the trust itself could gather, incorporating ecological data sets as well, those that were available and those that were provided new by the trust, and also local intelligence, so stuff from walkover surveys, all into sort of a sub-catchment based GIS model. And this is the important thing with SCIMAP is, and this was part of a PhD in partnership between Eden Rivers Trust and Durham University, where we're looking at how the hydrological connectivity related to all those other data sets and where the trust should concentrate its work. And it's almost impossible to pick out from this projector, but there's some areas in green here, and there's some areas in black. This is the actual SCIMAP output, and you can see these areas of predicted high accumulation of sediment. And the interesting thing here is that over the whole catchment, the fish population structured with in a certain way with the SCIMAP data, such that we could really pull out those parts of the catchment where we thought on a sub-catchment scale were probably going to be influenced by our work with farmers more than in some of the other areas where there was probably other problems that were the big underlying reason for problems with the ecology. So what do we like about SCIMAP? Well, we like it because it's based on simple principles. It's easy to explain to stakeholders, who at whatever level they are. Farmers understand that water runs downhill, as do regulators, as do Rivers Trust employees and so on. Everyone follows it. It's a risk model. It does not present itself as being a definitive answer. And that's really important when you're working with farmers, because you're not going in an accusatory way. You're saying, this is a risky area of land. This is something that might be happening if your practice is this, that, or the other. But it also means that you've got to go out into the landscape and you've got to actually identify those places where risk is coming in from other areas too. Because we can bypass hydrological connectivity by our behaviour. So it doesn't take away the need to have a presence on the ground like many other models try to do. And it really complements our approach to having people on the ground and doing walkover surveys, one-to-one work with landowners, rather than trying to circumvent it. And finally, it's very visual. And that makes it very easy to work with groups of landowners and other stakeholders. So the future, I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that from some of my colleagues, but we'd like to really see more delivery of SCIMAP amongst the Rivers Trust movement with other decision tools to try and support catchment management actions. We need more training in what SCIMAP does, how to operate it. We are considering whether we need to sort of try and harmonise the complementary ground truthing of our models like SCIMAP, so that we can scale up our work to give a national output, and that of course is very important for working with the national regulators on Water Framework Directive. And we're really interested in adopting some of the other SCIMAP models which relate to real data, like SCIMAP and Verse, so that's one of the things that we really want to work on in the future. Now, Rivers Trust was supposed to be giving a case study here, and they couldn't make it at the last minute, so they asked me just to pop up a couple of slides of what they're doing as a user. They are at the moment using SCIMAP alongside other ecological data, including the Keeping Rivers Cool data set that they're working with the agency on, combining it with their own ecological surveys, particularly with fish, EA relative shade, the SCIMAP outputs, and using those data sets and other ones to try and better target where they put advisors or experts on the ground. And I think that's where we all should be going really with SCIMAP, is using it as a complementary tool like that to guide decision making. rather than trying to use it in a distant, definitive way to say, you must only work there, or that's where you need to put your buffer strip. You have to ground truth it, and you have to look at it in the field. So, I think that's it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.